There are moments in history when the world gasps, when the so-called superpowers are forced to sit back in stunned silence, and when a single move changes the entire global script. That moment right now belongs to India. America didn't see it coming, the West underestimated it, and the world can't quite believe what just happened. Because in one decisive stroke, India didn't just play the game, it outplayed them all. They never saw it coming. Not in Washington, not in Brussels, not in the gilded rooms of global strategy, where smug elites have convinced themselves they hold all the cards. For years, they've looked at India as a partner, yes, but never as the player capable of flipping the entire board. Yet here we are, staring at the fallout of a move so audacious, so meticulously calculated that it has left even America, the world's self-proclaimed power broker, scrambling for explanations. The element of shock is not just in what India did, but in how it did it quietly, confidently, and without the faintest hint of hesitation. This wasn't the slow drip of gradual influence. This was an earthquake, a thunderclap across capitals where policymakers pride themselves on foresight. What's most extraordinary is the sheer bluntness of it all. No warnings, no polite preambles, no subtle overtures that gave the West time to adjust. It was the sort of maneuver that hits you before you even know you've been hit. The arrogance of believing India would always play second fiddle. The complacency of assuming it would forever dance to someone else's tune shattered in one decisive strike. And let's be clear, this shock was never about military might or nuclear arsenals. It was about intelligence, timing, and nerve. The kind of calculated boldness that only comes when a nation has spent decades biding its time, watching, learning, and waiting for exactly the right moment. When it finally came, India pounced, not recklessly, not carelessly, but with the precision of a grandmaster delivering checkmate. America's jaw dropped not because India made a move, but because it made the move nobody expected it had the guts to make. That's the beauty of shock. It's not just surprise, it's humiliation for those who thought they were in control. You can see it in the awkward statements, the hastily convened press conferences, the jittery rhetoric from officials who suddenly sound less like masters of the world and more like players trying to catch up. The silence is even louder than the words. Behind closed doors, they know they've been outflanked. They know their assumptions about India's role on the world stage have been blown apart, and they know the rest of the world has just seen the limits of American foresight. Because shock doesn't exist in isolation. It spreads. It sparks doubt among allies. It emboldens rivals. It forces everyone to rethink their positions. What India has done is not just rattle America. It has sent ripples across every corner of the globe. Those who thought they could predict the next decade of geopolitics have been forced to rip up their notes. The old order is creaking, and this shock has accelerated its collapse. And perhaps the most unsettling part of it all. This is not the end. It's the beginning. A nation that can deliver this level of surprise once can do it again. America may be shocked now, but the real fear isn't in the move that's already been made. It's in the knowledge that India has proven it can rewrite the rules whenever it chooses. Power has a funny way of slipping through the fingers of those who clutch it the tightest. For decades, the narrative was simple: America at the helm, Europe nodding along, and the rest of the world forced to play supporting roles in a drama already scripted by the West. But now that storyline has been ripped apart, the world isn't tilting anymore. It's shifting irreversibly, unmistakably, in a direction nobody in Washington wanted to acknowledge. And at the heart of this seismic shift stands India, no longer content to be described as emerging or developing, but unmistakably asserting itself as a central pillar in the architecture of global power. What's unfolding is not some cosmetic rearrangement of the stage. This is structural. This is foundational. For the first time in living memory, the West finds itself not dictating terms but reacting to them. India's move has crystallized a truth many were reluctant to admit, that the monopoly of influence once held by a few is being shattered. No longer is the game about who can shout the loudest. It's about who can act the smartest, who can move with the precision and confidence that commands not just attention, but respect. And right now, that respect is being directed squarely towards New Delhi. The symbolism of this shift cannot be overstated. In the past, a power play of this magnitude would have triggered threats, sanctions, or even military posturing. Instead, what do we see? Hesitation, a nervous recognition that the old tactics won't work. America knows it cannot strong-arm India the way it has done with smaller nations. It knows that its leverage is slipping, that its moral high ground has eroded, and that its voice no longer carries the same authority it once did. That's what makes this moment so transformative. The realization that India is not playing on someone else's board. It has built its own. And here's the part that really stings for the so-called established powers. This isn't just about India rising. It's about America receding. Every bold move from India casts an even harsher light on the stumbles, miscalculations, and internal fractures within the United States itself. The image of unshakable dominance is cracking, and into those cracks steps a nation that has spent decades preparing for exactly this opportunity. It's not a fluke, it's the inevitable consequence of a world growing tired of one-sided leadership. The shift is not just geopolitical, it's psychological. Across Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and beyond, nations are watching closely. They see in India not just a success story, but a template. Proof that the future doesn't belong to those who cling to yesterday's power, but to those bold enough to claim tomorrow's. That realization is spreading, and it terrifies those who once believed they were untouchable. This is no longer about one country outmaneuvering another. This is about a global reset. The pieces on the chessboard have been rearranged, and the old king is no longer the only figure dictating the game. A new force has stepped forward, commanding attention, reshaping alliances, and daring the world to recognize what has been obvious all along: power is not inherited, it is earned. And right now, the balance of that power is shifting firmly, decisively, and unapologetically in India's direction. The arrogance was staggering. For years, Western capitals convinced themselves they had India all figured out. They spoke of it as a rising partner, yes, but always within carefully drawn boundaries. Never too bold, never too disruptive, never daring to overturn the tables set so neatly by Washington, London, or Brussels. They mistook patience for passivity. They mistook restraint for weakness. And in doing so, they made one of the gravest miscalculations of modern geopolitics. They believed India would forever remain the apprentice, never the master. They believed wrong. This is the tragedy of hubris. The West assumed that its influence was so ingrained, so irresistible, that India would continue to nod along, grateful for a seat at the table, even if that seat was always at the far end. But India wasn't playing their game, it was quietly writing its own rules, preparing its own stage and biding its time. That time has now arrived, and the West is reeling because it never imagined India would have the audacity, or the capacity, to pull it off. Their miscalculation lies not only in underestimating India's strength, but in overestimating their own. The assumption that global narratives could still be spun in their favor, that pressure tactics would still silence dissent, that dangling promises of trade or partnerships would be enough to keep nations in line. That fantasy has evaporated. India has shown that it will not be swayed by the old tricks. It will not be bullied by the carrot and stick games that defined Western diplomacy for decades. And that refusal has left Western leaders staring at each other in disbelief, asking the same question: how did we let this happen? The answer, of course, is simple. They weren't listening. They weren't watching closely enough. They were blinded by their own sense of superiority. While they dismissed India as a country too chaotic, too fractured, too dependent to truly stand on its own, India was building. It was strengthening its economy, bolstering its defense, expanding its technological clout, and forging alliances that mattered. All the while, the West congratulated itself for being indispensable, oblivious to the reality that its dominance was slipping. Now the consequences of that blindness are plain. America looks shaken, Europe looks confused, and across the globe, allies who once followed the Western lead without question are beginning to wonder if perhaps they've been backing the wrong horse. The credibility of the West is not just dented, it's crumbling. Because the moment you fail to recognize another player's true potential, you don't just miscalculate, you lose the game entirely. And that is exactly what has happened. The West misread the signals, misjudged the stakes, and miscalculated the outcome. India didn't just defy expectations, it demolished them. It reminded the world that power doesn't ask permission, and respect is not granted, it's taken. The West thought it could predict the future. Instead, it's now staring at a reality it never planned for, a world where India is not the understudy, but the lead, and the old order no longer knows its lines. What makes this moment so extraordinary is not just that India delivered a blow the world never expected, it's how it was done. There was no chaos, no reckless gamble, no desperate roll of the dice. This was precision. This was planning. This was a masterclass in strategic genius, executed so seamlessly that by the time the world realized what had happened, it was already too late to respond. That is the mark of true power, not noise, not bluster, but the ability to act with such clarity and confidence that your rivals are left stunned into silence. For years, observers dismissed India as reactive rather than proactive, content to play a supporting role on the global stage. They were wrong. What we've witnessed is the culmination of long-term patience, the kind that only great civilizations are capable of. It was not about short-term wins, but about building the foundations brick by brick. Economic strength, technological capability, diplomatic leverage, and military readiness, all layered together into a platform from which to strike at exactly the right moment. Think about the brilliance of the timing. While America was distracted, mired in domestic division, and overextended abroad, India waited. While Europe bickered over its own survival, India calculated. While rivals underestimated its resolve, India sharpened its tools. Then, when the global chessboard was at its most fragile, India made its move. Not in anger, not in panic, but with the icy calm of a nation that knew exactly what it was doing. The genius wasn't in catching the West off guard. It was in ensuring the move was irreversible once it landed. And let's not pretend this was accidental. Nothing about this was improvised. Every detail was thought through, every angle anticipated. It's the kind of foresight that separates the great from the mediocre, the kind of vision that marks the difference between a player and a leader. India didn't just pull off a tactical win. It redefined the strategic landscape altogether. Suddenly, old alliances look shaky, old assumptions look laughable, and old powers look like they've been caught standing still. The genius also lies in subtlety. This wasn't about chest-thumping declarations or empty gestures designed to impress television cameras. India's brilliance was in making a move that spoke for itself, one so undeniable that even its critics were forced to acknowledge it. That's the power of true strategy. You don't need to scream your victory from the rooftops when the entire world is already whispering it in disbelief. And perhaps the most unsettling lesson for the West is this: if India could orchestrate this once, it can do it again. The real genius isn't just in the act, it's in the precedent it sets. A precedent that says India can calculate, execute, and prevail on its own terms whenever it chooses. That knowledge will now haunt the old powers, because they're not just facing a new competitor. They're facing a strategist of the highest order. The silence in the aftermath speaks louder than any headline. Capitals across the world are still scrambling to process what has just unfolded, their leaders caught between disbelief and grudging admiration. The move has not only shaken the confidence of the West, but has also sent shockwaves rippling across continents. Suddenly, the comfortable certainties of global politics have evaporated. Everyone is forced to rethink their positions, their alliances, their very assumptions about who really holds the levers of power. The aftermath of this seismic event is not temporary. It is rewriting the rules in real time. In Washington, the tone has shifted from arrogance to unease. Statements that once dripped with condescension now sound desperate, as if words alone can mask the sting of being blindsided. The very institutions that once prided themselves on setting the world's agenda are now clinging to relevance, searching for a narrative that doesn't expose just how badly they've been outmaneuvered. In Europe, the confusion is even more stark. A continent accustomed to following America's lead is suddenly confronted with the uncomfortable truth that leadership no longer flows in one direction. That hesitation, that uncertainty, is the clearest sign of just how far the ground has shifted. But the real story of the aftermath isn't the panic in Western boardrooms, it's the awakening elsewhere. In Africa, leaders are seeing a template for independence, proof that a nation can rise on its own terms without bowing to pressure from Washington or Brussels. In Latin America, governments long weary of Western dominance are watching closely, recognizing in India's boldness a mirror for their own aspirations. Across Asia, from southeast to central, there is a newfound sense of possibility. If India can force the world to take notice, then perhaps others can too. This is how power multiplies, not by proclamation, but by example. And then there's the ripple effect on rivals. Nations that have long chafed under America's shadow see in this moment not just a breach in the wall, but an invitation to push harder. The balance of alliances is shifting, the gravitational pull of influence tugging away from its old anchors. Suddenly, partnerships once dismissed as peripheral are gaining traction, while the once unshakable bonds of Western dominance are showing cracks. This is the price of being outplayed. You don't just lose the moment, you lose the narrative, and with it the loyalty of those who once looked to you for direction. The most telling aftermath, however, is psychological. For decades, the West operated under the assumption that it could not be challenged meaningfully, that any defiance would eventually bend under its weight. That assumption has now been obliterated. India's move has proved that boldness, when coupled with preparation, can overturn the hierarchy of power in an instant. That realization is not just humbling, it's terrifying. Because if one nation can rewrite the rules, what stops others from following suit? This is the new reality. The world has been jolted awake, the old order shaken to its core. The aftermath is not a pause before normality returns. It is the birth of a new normal, one in which the West is no longer the unquestioned conductor of the orchestra. And in this new composition, India has claimed a seat not at the edge, but at the very center of the stage. The message is unmistakable. The old world order is cracking, the so-called masters of the game have been caught stumbling, and a nation once treated as a supporting act has walked onto the stage and stolen the show. You can call it shocking, you can call it stunning, you can even call it terrifying if you sit in Washington or Brussels. But you cannot deny it. Power has shifted, decisively and unapologetically. India has proven that greatness is not bestowed by permission, nor granted by those clinging to yesterday's supremacy. Greatness is seized, greatness is earned, and in one bold stroke, India has reminded the world that it is not just a participant in history, it is a force that shapes it. So let the West scramble, let the critics whimper, let the doubters choke on their disbelief, because the truth is written in bold letters for the entire world to see. The future will not be dictated by those who grew comfortable in the past. The future belongs to those who have the courage to outthink, outmaneuver, and outplay them all. And right now the future belongs to India,